Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our third season of Skeptic TV. Today is Saturday, April 13th, 2013, and we have joining us finally our tech guy, Colin Masson. You get to see him in the flesh. Hello, Colin. And we have Blue Juggernaut joining us. He's somebody from our beginning who decided to rejoin us in the third season. And there's somebody I don't recognize. Oh yeah, it's a special guest we have lined up that Colin chased down and demanded we have this season because of his importance and how much he has to discuss with the basis of Skeptic TV, and that is trying to debunk and misinformation and stupidity from the general population. We have with us Dr. Micheal Mann, distinguished professor at Penn State University. Hello, Dr. Mann.
Hi, it's good to be with you.
And for the first time ever, we're going to turn over the interview and hosting duties to Colin Masson. Go ahead, sir.
Sorry, I missed a bit of the intro because my Skype just crashed. So that was great timing, right at the start of the show. Sorry. Chris, where were you?
I just finished up introductions, and I want to tell everyone this is the first time we get to see you in the flesh on the show.
No. Second time. Third time.
Was it the third time? Wow, it's been a long time. So go ahead, and I told everyone how you demanded we have Dr. Mann this season because of his importance to what we did.
Yeah. Well, for those that might not be familiar with your work, Dr. Mann, could you give a short introduction of why you are currently so famous in the climate debate?
Well, nearly 15 years ago, my colleagues and I published a graph in the journal Nature. It has come to be known as the hockey stick graph, and it's become an icon in the climate change debate. It was an attempt to extend the record of global temperature back in time because we only have about a century or so of widespread thermometer measurements. So those thermometer measurements tell us that the globe has warmed about 1 degree C, about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the past century. But what it doesn't tell us is how unusual that sort of warming might be. And so one way that climate scientists try to tackle that question is by attempting to extend the record farther back in time using indirect indicators of climate, what we call proxy data, like tree rings and corals, ice cores, indirect measures of climate that we can use to try to extend the record back in time. And when we did that, what we found was that the recent warming, the warming we've seen over the past century, was in fact without precedent as far back as we could go, 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. And the shape of the curve, because of the long-term cooling from about 1,000 years ago into the depths of the Little Ice Age of the 17th, 18th, 19th century. So you can think of that long-term trend, that slow cooling trend over time, if you will, as sort of the handle of a hockey stick, and the sharp warming of the past century being the blade. And so this curve got a name. It became an icon in the climate change debate. It was featured in the summary for policymakers of the third assessment report of the IPCC back in 2001, and thus this work, and we, for publishing this work, became objects of attack by the forces of climate change denial, by those looking to discredit the case for human-caused climate change, because our work became such an icon in the debate. They saw the need to try to discredit us by whatever means available to them, really.
Yeah, one of the most known ones is because in the first, in one of the IPCC reports, I forget the date which one it was, they had a medieval warm period that was warmer than today, but it was one of the earliest reconstructions we had, which was a local set. And one of the memes we have with climate science denial, is that that's with your new graph, the medieval warm period was abolished. Which, we can still see it in the graph, only it's a certain, regional effect.
Yeah, so that's right. So what in the original 1990 IPCC report, there was this schematic. It wasn't actually a reconstruction. It was just sort of a schematic depicting temperatures in central England in
Yeah.
one location. And it was sort of the artist's guess. It wasn't an actual quantitative estimate of how temperatures had
Yeah,
changed.
it was missing, for example, the temperature measurements in it. The
Yeah, it didn't
scale.
even have units, right? It didn't even have dimensions of temperature on the vertical scale. It was just this relative graph. And one thing that, as scientists have gone back and tried to place that graph in context, another interesting aspect of it is that it was missing the warming of the past half century because of the way it was constructed. And so when you show that original graph on the scale of the modern instrumental record that extends up obviously into the late 20th century and now the early 21st century, it turns out that even in that depiction, medieval temperatures were substantially below where they are today. So it doesn't even support the case made by climate change contrarians. But nonetheless, it was not as striking and as quantitative a depiction of temperatures as the other estimates that were published by us and other scientists in the late 1990s. And obviously science progresses, right?
Yeah.
So what was originally a schematic depiction of temperature in one region of the globe was replaced by more careful quantitative measurements of temperature changes, incorporating a larger region of the globe and using more quantitative methods of estimating temperature.
Yeah, we're now joined with a whole hockey stick team with all kinds of research that actually confirm what your originally research showed.
Sure, there are now dozens, literally dozens of these sorts of reconstructions. In fact, there was one reconstruction published a few weeks ago, which extends the record by Marcotte et al. Exactly, in the journal Science, which sought to extend the record using other types of information back over the entire period since the last ice age. The modern interglacial warm period that we call the Holocene, that extends back over the past 11 plus thousand years. And what they found was that there's no evidence of warming, of sort of the abrupt warming that we see over this past century in their estimate of temperatures going back even 11,000 years in time. And so when you look at the modern warming in the context of their longer term reconstruction, it becomes clear just how unprecedented what we're seeing today actually is.
Yeah, and what we saw with the publication of this new paper was basically quite a stir among the so-called skeptics, climate science deniers.
Right.
That they said a short-term spike wouldn't be picked up by the long-term record they had with proxies. They didn't have enough resolutions, or they were attacking the recent warming in the graph, which was said in the paper wasn't robust. But we do have the temperature records which are robust.
Yeah, I mean, yep, absolutely. I actually said in an interview that I did about the paper, I said that the authors are going to be attacked personally and viciously because because their findings are going to be inconvenient to this whole industry of manufactured controversy and denial. Much of it, unfortunately, funded by vested interests, fossil fuel interests, conservative foundations tied to the fossil fuel industry. And so I predicted that they were going to be attacked, in fact, personally attacked. And that's, of course, what happened. And the sort of modus operandi of climate change deniers is to basically just throw as much mud on the wall as possible and hope that some of it sticks. And so that's what happened. They, of course, went after every possible aspect of the work. They questioned the integrity of the authors. They did everything they could to try to smear the study and the scientists. And ultimately, the scientists published a response.
An FAQ on real climate, if I remember correctly.
On the site that I co-founded with Gavin Schmidt and some other climate scientists, realclimate.org. They published a response which basically pointed out that that the statements made in the original article stand without modification. Nothing that the climate change deniers have brought up in any way changes the bottom line conclusions of the paper. But, the real purpose of the attacks is to try to muddy the waters, to try to confuse the public, to try to obscure the fact that this is just one in a long line of compelling additional lines of evidence that is telling us that climate change is real, that we're responsible for it, and that indeed it will have severe impacts on us if we don't do something to deal with the problem.
Very true. Now, talking about attacks, with this paper, it was aimed at the scientists themselves on the research a bit, and it was more in the blogosphere and with a bit of the media and not much else. In the case of you and some other scientists, there were actually legal attacks, really trying to completely discredit your work through that.
Right.
One of the most famous ones that I'm aware of is, for example, from Ken Cuccinelli, which when he started a investigation into your research after the hacked emails from Climategate.
Yeah, so there were back in December 2009, actually November 2009, in the lead up to the Copenhagen summit. There was this manufactured controversy where thousands of emails were stolen from
with the famous phrase "hide to decline."
Well, there were all sorts of words and phrases that were taken from these emails, taken out of context, and presented as if they called the science into question, as if they demonstrated some sort of misconduct on the part of scientists, some falsification, all sorts of outrageous claims were made based on the misrepresentation of these emails. Since then, there have been, I think, 9 different investigations. Several in the UK, the National Science Foundation's Inspector General, NOAA, the EPA, my university, Penn State University. There have literally been, like I said, 9 different investigations, all of which have found that there was no impropriety on the part of any of the scientists. The only wrongdoing in the entire matter was the criminal theft of the emails in the first place. But unfortunately, there have been no repercussions for the criminals who stole the emails in the first place. And what's very telling is to look at the institutions and individuals who immediately trumpeted this, like I said, this manufactured scandal.
One of the first one was, for example, if I remember correctly, was James Delingpole with his blog post. And from there it spread to What's Up With That, Anthony Watts, the Hartle Institute, Competitive Enterprise Institute, Fox News.
Right. I mean, and if you trace it back, if you look at all of the institutions and all of the individuals, it turns out that they're all connected, or just about all of them are connected in one way or another with a very small number of, of interest groups, of conservative interest groups funded by people like the Koch brothers in the U.S., who are the primary funders of climate change denial. They of course are the Koch Industries, which they own, is the single largest privately held corporation in the U.S. It's a petrochemical corporation, derives much of its money from the transport of fossil fuels, and they have worked hard. They've spent literally tens of millions of dollars manufacturing a fake campaign to discredit the science of climate change, to attack scientists, to fund front groups who harass scientists with legal attacks, like freedom of information demands, etc. And so the interesting thing here is that all of these attacks and the spread of this fake Climategate scandal that was used to motivate additional attacks can all be traced back to, a small number of organizations and front groups funded by the Koch brothers, by the SCAFE foundations, another far-right wing conservative foundation in the U.S., and the Murdoch media empire, which of course owns the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and many of the tabloids in the UK that helped trumpet this fake scandal. And it all happened, of course, in the lead up to the single greatest opportunity that had arrived in years, the Copenhagen Summit,
Yeah.
the single greatest opportunity to actually make meaningful progress in dealing with the problem of climate change. So as I've stated before, these stolen emails and the attacks that were manufactured by them were indeed a crime against humanity, because who's going to pay the price? It's going to be, our children and grandchildren who are going to potentially suffer greater impacts from climate change because we delayed action due to the, efforts of these groups who, tried to poison the public discourse on this issue.
Yeah, I find the title, I forgot the author at the moment, but from the book Merchants of Doubt, it's so fitting for what they do, because they just have to spread a few things that raise doubt, raise questions, that make it hard for people to sift through. Because a very fine example, for example, was with one of the arguments Monckton was giving in one of the debates, where he said that
Lord Christopher Monckton,
yes,
of the UK, yes.
And in one of the debates, he said that genetic modified foods are safe for human consumption, which is correct according to the literature. It is safe to humans to eat. But then one of the really strange things is that he then, I don't know if it was just a misunderstanding from the science or inadvertently something that he didn't meant to do, but he then completely mangled the history of when genetic modified organisms became available, because he said he had learned about them when he was a lad in school. Well, it wasn't even invented when he was in school.
Well, maybe he has a time machine. Who knows? Because he is a smart guy. Yeah.
And well, that's the thing, is that sometimes even when they say things that are true, often there's something in there that's simply incorrect, and it's so hard to figure out what they're saying is correct or sift out. And even if they start talking about climate science, which is a really nuanced and complex matter, and even I really read the subject, follow it, and it's sometimes really hard and time-consuming to find out if they have a valid argument.
Right.
And so someone who's just listening to the news or who is a complete layman on the subject will not have the tools available to do this, and that will allow them to be completely successful in what they're doing. And what you said, the funding what they're getting from the Koch brothers, the detail there is you don't need a lot of money to do this. For Anthony Watts doesn't need much funding for his website, and it's very effective.
Right, and and the interesting thing is, you look at someone like Anthony Watts, and he's taken, I think, $88,000 from the Heartland Institute, which is a decent
Urban Heat Island project.
Presumably for writing this report attacking the instrumental record. And the Heartland Institute, of course, guess who one of their main funders is? It's the Koch brothers. And so sometimes the connections are maybe one step removed or even two steps removed, but there is a very large amount of funding coming down from above which filters out. It funds the Heartland Institutes, it funds the Competitive Enterprise Institute that has been going after climate scientists with Freedom of Information Act demands and other forms of harassment. And so it is effective. When they spend tens of millions of dollars in funding various groups, in various front groups, various organizations whose sole goal is to muddy the waters, guess what? The water gets muddy, and that's all they need. They don't need to win the scientific argument. They realized long ago that all they had to do was to confuse the public enough to, as you said before, the merchants of doubt, to introduce enough doubt into the mindset of the public that those, vested interests who don't want to see any progress made in dealing with these issues on a policy basis can very effectively block any policy progress. All you need in this country to prevent policies from being passed is a divided public. And so that's what they've tried to do, divide the public on matters of science that are policy relevant and that represent a threat to some powerful vested interests. And so, Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway wrote The Merchants of Doubt, which was about the larger picture of how, climate change is just one of many areas of environmental science, ozone depletion, acid rain, tobacco.
Yeah, which was really strange to see because that was before my time that I was actually involved with science reporting, citizen science reporting, and to read up on that, what was happening in that time frame with how they completely derailed the dialogue on the science, how dangerous smoking can be, even secondhand smoking can be to people.
Well, there was a line from the documents. Ultimately, the tobacco industry was successfully sued by the attorney generals of a large number of states, and there was a settlement. And because of that settlement, they had to release a lot of their internal documents. And one of the most famous lines in one of the internal documents was the line, "Doubt is our product." It was
I remember
a tobacco industry insider basically saying that their product, what they were trying to do, was to confuse the public and policymakers about the very basic fact that tobacco was leading to increased incidence of lung cancer and other health ailments. And there's Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway establish a parallel between what was done there decades ago and what the fossil fuel industry is doing today, which is essentially using exactly the same playbook. Guess what? Some of the same individuals, some of the same
organizations.
Scientists who are acting as advocates for the fossil fuel industry today, like Fred Singer, were acting as advocates for the tobacco industry decades ago. I call them all-purpose deniers. It doesn't matter what their expertise is. Somehow they feel confident in attacking any science that links the behavior of some vested industry with potentially detrimental impacts to society or the environment. That's why so my own book, the Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars, it sort of ends up being a natural continuation of what Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway talk about in The Merchants of Doubt, because I happen to be one specific scientist who found myself involuntarily in the center of those attacks because of the threat that our work, the hockey stick curve, represented from fossil fuel interests who don't want to see any regulation of carbon emissions and will do anything they can to discredit science that implies we need to do something about our carbon emissions.
Yeah, it's so dangerous because it provides such a neat picture of what is happening, and it makes it a very good symbol to illustrate what we know about what is happening, and that's what makes it dangerous and a target for them.
That's right. That's what we didn't realize when we published that graph in the late 1990s, that by doing so, we ensured, or I ensured in particular as the lead author of the study, that I would be subject to the same sorts of attacks that, Rachel Carson was subject to by the chemical industry decades ago because of her work on DDT.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned Silent Springs today on your Twitter feed.
Yeah, I mean, one of the front groups funded by the Koch brothers, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, actually maintains a website. Rachel was wrong.
Still do?
They still maintain a website which is dedicated to trying to destroy her legacy. They're not willing to let her lie peacefully in her grave. They have this very cynical view that if they can somehow bring down Rachel Carson, they will bring down the entire environmental movement, much in the way that they feel that if they can bring down me and they can bring down the hockey stick, that they'll somehow bring down the entire case for concern over human-caused climate change, which of course couldn't be farther from the truth.
Sure.
If I had never lived, if I had never published that graph, we would still have extremely compelling evidence that climate change is real and that it represents a threat.
Yeah, and also completely ignoring the other research that's been done that shows the same thing, which would have happened anyway, even without your work. One of the things that really strikes me with these kind of attacks is that they get really outraged when you stop being polite towards them, when you lash out for once. And completely ignoring the language they use, that they've been bothering you with Freedom of Information Act for information that's already available on the internet or could have been looked up or simply requested. Same thing with the legal attacks, and then they completely will get offended when you lash out in a justified rage sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, or it's often manufactured outrage. They want people to believe they're upset. They want I refer to this in the book. This is the politics of personal destruction. It's an application of the same techniques that have been developed in politics by people like Karl Rove, and I talk about this in the book. So John Kerry was a war hero. Mm-hmm. And to try to win the presidency for George W. Bush, they realized they needed to somehow undermine the great authority that brain, that he was an American war hero. And so what they did was to go directly at his strength. His strength was that he was a war hero. So what they did was to manufacture a fake campaign claiming that he was undeserving of the medals that he had won for his war duty. Which
is quite a thing to do.
Yes, and in fact, it even has a name now. It's called swift boating because there were these people who claimed they were on a swift boat in the war with Kerry. Within the Vietnam War, and that they witnessed firsthand what he had done, and it wasn't what he had claimed, and he didn't deserve the medals. And of course, all these characters ended up making a lot of money, and guess who they were connected to? The same groups that we're talking about today, the Scapes and the Kochs. Those are the people who were funding this attack, and one of the first people to break this attack back, during the campaign, one of the first sources of news, when it comes to this, the swift boat.
Let me guess, Fox News.
Somebody who appears on Fox News quite commonly now, a guy named Mark Morano. At the time, he was working for a network called Cybercast News Services, which is funded by the Scapes. And he literally is the person who first broke the swift boat story, the fake story. Mm-hmm. He had worked for Rush Limbaugh at one time. He then went on to work for James Inhofe, the biggest denier in the U.S. Senate, climate change denier from the state of Oklahoma, where he used the very techniques that he had honed in attacking John Kerry through this swift boat attack. He used those same techniques against climate scientists, and he has since gone on. He's now funded directly by the SCAPE foundations through a front group that they fund that he works for, and he continues to attack climate scientists now using the methods that he honed in the original attacks against John Kerry in that presidential election. And so we are seeing literally the swift boating. It's become a part of our lexicon here in the U.S. It means an attack, a bad faith attack based on manufactured or often just plain false allegations against a person. And the attack is waged in such a manner that the person doesn't have any hope of fighting back because they're overwhelmed by the number of sources that are perpetrating the attack, the echo chamber that exists in conservative radio, for example. There's this echo chamber that a false allegation is repeated so often, and it propagates through this echo chamber in a way that truth can't fight back. It just doesn't have the megaphone that the attackers have. And that is what is being done now, for example, in the attacks against climate scientists. We are being subject to swift boat-like attacks by the very same person in some instances, this guy Mark Morano, who was responsible for the original swift boat attack against John Kerry. I talk about this in the book. It's a logical culmination of the kinds of industry-funded attacks that were waged against people like Rachel Carson and Steve Schneider, a climate scientist who early on spoke out about the threat of climate change, people like James Hansen and others.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things was with James Hansen is that he protested for the Keystone XL pipeline and got arrested for civil disobedience. And that got paraded around a lot on the denier websites in such a way to try to basically assassinate his character.
Right. I mean, you know, as we're scientists, but many of us also see ourselves as having a role as citizens, and you know, each of us has to be comfortable in the line that we draw between, you know, when it comes to an issue like climate change, you know, informing the public discourse, which I think is essential for scientists to do, because I think in the absence of scientists trying to inform the societal debate over matters like climate change, if we weren't doing that, then there would be a vacuum left behind, which would be filled by the forces of disinformation and misinformation. So it's important that scientists, in my view, participate in the public discourse over issues like climate change. But you know, there is a line that we have to draw between, you know, informing the discourse and advocating, for example, for policies, for specific policies. And in the case of James Hansen, he's decided that his, you know, duty as a citizen is such that he's, you know, he feels compelled to advocate for specific policies that he feels will be necessary to prevent us from committing to dangerous climate changes. And so he's, you know, gotten arrested protesting the Keystone XL pipeline, also protesting the removal of mountaintops by coal interests to get at the coal buried in beneath mountaintops. He's been far more active on sort of the advocacy side of the issue than most scientists are comfortable in being. But like I said, you know, we each have to, you know, decide where we draw the line in our role as scientists, and between our role as scientists and our role as citizens. You know, like any citizen, it's appropriate for us to speak out about what we feel challenges civilization, and what sorts of policies are necessary to deal with those challenges. In the case of Hansen, he's gone farther than most scientists are willing to go.
Yeah, what often the criticism towards activism from scientists is, from the denier side, is that the science should speak for itself. The problem is the science is in the literature and is not readily accessible or easily understandable for the lame person, or easily translatable to something that is bite-sized for the media.
Right.
And
yeah.
You do need scientists or experienced reporters working with scientists to translate this and spread the information. So you do need the scientists, and sometimes the scientists to do work with protests, to be symbolic.
Yeah, I mean, there's an irony, right, to, you know, those who say, well, you know, scientists should just keep silent. The science should speak for itself. And many of the people, you know, the individuals who are making that argument are advocating for special interests that feel it's perfectly appropriate to spend tens of millions of dollars poisoning the public discourse and filling our airwaves and our newspapers with misinformation and disinformation when it comes to the science. So what they want essentially in this battle is unilateral disarmament. They want the side of science to disarm itself by not participating at all in the discourse, so that they can pollute the public discourse with their misinformation and disinformation. And I think that's why scientists have to play a role in, have to speak out and make sure that the public discourse is informed by an honest and accurate assessment of the scientific evidence.
Something they often do agree with, for example, and on the matter of a lot of environmentalists are actually against, for example, genetic modification, the introduction of those plants. And in those situations, you do see them advocating for scientists to speak out or counter the environmentalists. So sometimes it's really strange behavior sometimes.
It's a one-sided skepticism, right?
Yeah.
Which is no skepticism at all.
Which is the reason why I often call them so-called skeptics.
Right. I mean, true skepticism means, first of all, is essential in science. All good scientists are skeptics. We demand evidence. The Carl Sagan was a famous, maxim spoken by Carl Sagan. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that's the way science works. It's the skepticism that's intrinsic in science that provides, again, as Sagan called it, the self-correcting machinery of science. But unfortunately, there are some who aren't skeptics at all. Who want to try to claim the mantle of skepticism. But what they're actually advocating for is like I said before, a one-sided skepticism where they're willing to call into question established science based on the flimsiest of arguments that don't stand up to the slightest bit of scientific scrutiny. And that's not skepticism. That's contrarianism or denial.
Yeah, it's something that I mentioned in a video that I made, a call for skepticism. At the end, I make the point that skepticism doesn't start with the viewpoints of others, but with your own viewpoints, the evidence you use for it, and the due diligence you do for it. That's why my website is a nod to that. It's the reason that I called it realskeptic.com.
Right.
It's a nod to that. I see myself as a skeptic. I ask for evidence, I ask for sources, and I can look it up, that I can evaluate the claim people are making. But if it doesn't stack up, I say I don't have to accept it. Or I can actually say no, what you're citing now is wrong based on these sources.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you guys are out doing that. There's the group Skeptical Science. John Cook and others in Australia who have maintained this wonderful website. It's a great resource for people who are genuinely confused about the debate over climate change. We have to reclaim the rightful role of that word. We have to reclaim the term skeptic and skepticism for its rightful role in science, and not cede that term to those who are in no way deserving of the title of skeptic.
It's the reason why SkepticTV has a tagline, "We don't believe, we accept." And accept is a nod to the evidence and our research that we do. And of course we can be wrong. We can be wrong on simple things, but as a skeptic, it means if someone brings along valid evidence, you will readjust your position. And I've done that.
Right.
I started out as someone not liking genetic modification. And I did a complete 180 on that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that that's the difference, really, between a scientific approach to these issues and an anti-scientific approach. The scientific approach is to allow your view with regard to policy and policy implications to be informed by the science, but it better not work the other way around. It better not be that your views are in some way influencing the science you do or the way you interpret or understand the science. That's what's wrong.
Yeah, what we often see is with those that really are against the current conclusions in the scientific community, is that they fall under the free market fundamentalists, as some call them, that they really adhere to the free market ideas that there should be no governmental interference. And because of that, they cannot see that we do need a organized approach to this. And how we do that then, well, that's up for debate, and we can make informed decisions on that and see what works, what doesn't work. But you can't really dismiss the science based on a certain policy idea you have.
Right. Again, one of the famous skeptics, perhaps the most well-known climate change denier in the U.S. Senate, James Inhofe of Oklahoma, who, by the way, is who comes from the hottest state ever. As of 2 summers ago, his state of Oklahoma broke the record for all-time heat in the U.S. And as that was unfolding, and as Oklahoma was being subject to record heat and drought, he was still proclaiming that climate change is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people. And something he was quoted saying not too long ago. This was on MSNBC. I believe it was on the Rachel Maddow show on MSNBC. He actually said that he used to believe, and of course he used the word believe, in science it's not about belief, but he said he used to believe in the science of climate change, but he changed his mind when he learned how much it would cost to deal with, which tells you everything you need to know about the way that someone like James Inhofe thinks about these issues. They're not arriving at a position based on, a logical analysis and assessment of the evidence. They're arriving at a position based on their politics or their economic beliefs and working backward to selectively find the quote unquote science necessary to support their beliefs.
Yeah, it's really strange often to see, especially when there was a little bit of cold weather when he built that igloo.
Right.
I saw that pop up in my news feeds, and I was like, why are we doing this? These are things that were actually predicted by the climate models, that the jet stream would weaken and we could get influxes of cold air from the polar regions.
Well, there's a story I have to tell. It's about James Inhofe again, because it was that 2 summers later, it was the summer of 2011, and he had been chosen as the keynote speaker of the Heartland Institute. Remember, they're a Koch-funded front group that attacks the science of climate change.
Which put up very lovely billboard signs last year.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they compared those who accept the science of climate change to the Unabomber. And needless to say, they've seen, any credibility they might have had collapse since that and other incidents. But they're still out there. They're still getting money from people like the Koch brothers. Just the other day, I was informed by colleagues in my department that they had received in the mail this letter from Fred Singer, one of the original climate change deniers, a letter from Fred Singer with a CD and a book. It was a free book. It was unsolicited, and it was sent presumably to thousands of scientists and faculty members around the country. And the book was a typical climate change denial, screed that is based not on science, but on the usual misrepresentations and misleading talking points of climate change denial.
Those that we've basically been talking about and proving not to be correct for the past few decades.
Yeah, all of the usual, completely unsupported talking points that, you can actually go to the site Skeptical Science, and they have a list of the 100 or so leading contrarian talking points and why they're wrong. But anyways, so Inhofe, is supported. The Heartland Institute. It's this same group. Had invited him to be their keynote speaker at their annual climate conference, which is a climate change denier conference. It's not a real scientific conference. It's supposed to look and sound like one, but they just invite people like Lord Monckton and James Inhofe and others, hoping to garner some media attention for their continued attacks against climate science. And they had invited him to be the keynote speaker that year, and he had accepted, but he had to decline at the last minute. This was in July 2011. He had gotten sick swimming in a lake back in Oklahoma.
Oh.
And the lake was suffering. He had gotten sick because it was suffering from an algal bloom that was a result of the unprecedented heat and drought that Oklahoma was experiencing that summer. And because of that, he could not give the keynote address at their climate change denial conference. You can't make stuff like this up. The iron is so thick you can barely see through it.
Yeah, I find this kind of really strange, these kind of things. That everything basically what... someone is causing some static, Yoshimo. is that these kind of things then are dismissed. No, it wasn't global warming, or it wasn't because it was really warm, or it was a fluke, or the US was warmer in what was it, 1934 or something is what they claim?
Yeah, it wasn't. So last summer was the warmest summer ever in the US. But you'll still find, again, this is one of the things, when it comes to climate change denial, unfortunately, they don't think it matters whether or not a statement is true or false. All that matters is whether the people that they're trying to convince of it think it's true or false, right? So they're willing to repeat, talking points that have been discredited decades ago in the hope that some people will still believe it if it's said often enough that people will accept it as fact, even if it's clearly false.
Yeah, one of the things that I then often see, that I do produce videos on YouTube on climate science, and I try to be as fair as possible on the subject and nuanced as possible. But one of the things I notice is that even on the video that I make and I actually refute a point I'm making, they just restate the point immediately in the comment sections, which is proves to me they haven't even watched the video, or they would have responded to it in context of what I had said.
No, it's remarkable, and unfortunately, one of the things that we've learned in recent years is some of that. When you see comment threads that are populated almost entirely by climate change denial myths, when you go to news groups or comment threads in articles or videos on the web, the fact that the comment sections are just permeated with climate change denial talking points, it's not coincidental. And some of what looks like just ordinary people posting comments isn't that at all. We know that some of these groups, because there were some documents about a year ago that were leaked that showed that the Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the biggest, after the Koch brothers, probably one of the largest funders of climate change denial, organized climate change denial in the U.S., they had been considering a proposal from a group that generates astroturf online campaigns. So one of the things they do is this group hires people to post in comment sections in blogs using pseudonyms or anonymous identities. And it's supposed to look like ordinary people who are expressing skepticism about climate change, but a lot of it is actually coming from groups that produce this sort of stuff professionally, and it's made to look like it's organic, like it's actually coming from individual people. And so when you see that stuff online and you wonder, wow, how can it be that 90% of the people reading this article have these contrarian views about the science? Well, it probably isn't that 90% of the people who are reading that article have those views, but rather that the other side, the sort of climate change denial promoters, are extremely effective, and they're even funding efforts to permeate the web with their talking points, with their discredited talking points. And again, their hope is that if they repeat these falsehoods often enough, people will believe they're true, especially if it looks like it's coming from ordinary people rather than some front group funded by the Chamber of Commerce to use IP anonymizer services to make it look like comments are coming in randomly from around the world.
Yeah, it ties also in with two other things that I've noticed, is that sometimes they get actually AstroTurf advice what they should do. There's this famous video that was released once of someone instructing to downvote books on Amazon and leave negative comments.
I was subject to that myself on Amazon.
Yeah, I saw a few of his comments. They were lovely. And they were interesting to read, to say the least. And another thing is that, the deniers and the so-called skeptics, because I do make a difference between the two.
Sure.
Because some people are just simply misinformed.
Yeah, absolutely. A
And
lot of people.
yeah.
A lot of people are honestly misinformed by these efforts.
Yeah. And also is that these groups tend to be very vocal. The most people which are on the fence or accept what's being said in the scientific literature aren't really vocal or are scared off by how well in your face or forceful people often engage yourself.
That's right.
It's the very reason that I have a civility rule on my channel, that if you are basically shouting in someone's face or calling them names or anything, I just kick you out, because that doesn't contribute to a constructive dialogue.
That's right.
And I don't have the time or inclination to facilitate that.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's extremely important, and it's why, at Real Climate, our comment sections are moderated. We don't allow ad hominem attacks or, the continued reposting of discredited talking points. We can actually see the IP addresses of the people coming in, and there have been times when we've seen IP addresses that were tied to some of these organizations coming in with pseudonymous identities or anonymous identities, trying to look like they were just average Joes, rather than somebody tied to one of these groups that has been trying to perpetuate the disinformation.
Which is also really strange, because Anthony Watts is often when he addresses criticism on his blog, and you do use a pseudonym, you get attacked for using a pseudonym.
Right.
And which it doesn't invalidate what you say. It only says because you want to be, you don't want to reveal who you are for some reason. For example, I don't care that my real name is out there. I just don't share certain things on my real name.
Right. And it's understandable. There are legitimate reasons for that. Sure. Yeah.
And I can understand that also I'm also active in the religious debates, which is even a bigger minefield with the kind of language you can encounter towards yourself. And with some of the things you can see in America with communities actually expelling someone for their beliefs, what they have.
Yeah.
I can really understand why you want to do things anonymously and use a pseudonym. So it can indicate a little problem, like you said, with spreading information or using duplicate accounts and such. But then outright attacking them for like what the Denialists do is often really odd, then, because they use the techniques themselves.
Yeah, no, and that's like, it's that way with so many things when it comes to matters like climate change, where, unfortunately, legitimate institutions or legitimate methods, devices that exist to help encourage productive discourse are taken advantage of and are used in ways they were never intended. I mean, that's very much the case with the Freedom of Information Act demands, which were originally the Freedom of Information Act was something that was passed to encourage transparency in government, so that government institutions were subject to being transparent about how it is that they're arriving at the conclusions or the policies that they produce. And I don't think that the people who originally created the Freedom of Information Act ever imagined that they would be abused in the way they're now being abused, to try to subject scientists to open-ended fishing expeditions whose sole intent very clearly is to tie up their hands, is to intimidate and harass them, and to set an example for other scientists who might think of speaking out about the science of climate change, or any area of science, any area where science is speaking truth to power.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for scientists to get like 50 Freedom of Information Acts stating the same thing, asking for the same kind of information.
Right, and how can that be considered anything other than bad faith harassment?
Yeah. I can understand that you want to have access to certain information or how to reconstruct information that was being used or methods that have been used.
Sure.
But do what I do if I need information. Just email the scientist involved.
Well, and
9 out of
usually,
10,
yep.
you will get an answer.
Well, that's right. And in many cases, in the attacks that were made against us, all of our data was available online.
Yeah.
There were these completely false allegations that were made that we weren't providing our data. All of our data were available. And it turned out what the people who were claiming we weren't providing our data were really after were personal emails between us, our deliberations as scientists discussing, our science, or various intermediate calculations along the way as we, produced the results that we produced. And so what they were really trying to do wasn't to get a hold of our data or methods, because that was already out there. They were falsely claiming that those things weren't out there, when in fact what they were really after was harassing us with demands to basically produce everything that we've ever done and spend all of our time doing nothing other than responding to these sorts of harassing demands. And unfortunately, it spread. So, it isn't just us. There are now dozens of scientists, climate scientists around the country who continue to be subject to harassment using state freedom of information laws by groups generally tied to, the Koch brothers or the SCAFE foundations. And they have, very innocent sounding names like the American Tradition Institute or the Competitive Enterprise Institute. But guess what? The names may change, but it's the same individuals and the same institutions that are funding them, and the same purpose: to harass and discredit science, inconvenient to their, to those whose interests they're really representing.
Yeah, like mentioned previously, Chris Horner pops up for several organizations.
Sure.
First time I met him was with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and after that I saw him pop up for ATI and other organizations. Like, what's going on here? How many organizations is he tied to?
Right.
And that's something you often see. And for example, scientists themselves are rarely involved in that many organizations.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as a scientist, you generally have a single employer. It's the university or the government research institution that funds you. And yet when it comes to climate change denial, some of these individuals appear to be tied to dozens of different groups and institutions. It's all very odd.
And really time-consuming figuring out how where they are, where they work and where they get their funding from.
Well, there was a really nice figure that was produced as part of a publication, a book chapter by an academic who studies climate change denial from a sociological point of view, Riley Dunlap and Andrew McCreight. And they published a paper, I think it was about a year ago, that had a figure. It was a diagram of sort of the organized structure of climate change denial and all of the institutions and individuals, and how you can indeed follow it back to a small number of funders who are the usual suspects: the Murdoch empire, the Koch brothers, the SCAFE foundations. And there are the dozens and dozens of groups, of front groups with different names, many of them sounding very innocent, and lots of individuals who have multiple titles working for multiple groups. But it all ties back to a small number of vested interests who are manufacturing this echo chamber of denial when it comes to climate change.
Yeah. Well, I also see that it's almost time to end the segment, as you wanted to be on our air for about 1 hour, and so you can do other things today. And
we should have some time for Q&A, though, I think.
Yeah, we had one question I saw.
Okay.
which was, have you seen the Great Global Warming Swindle?
Yeah, the Great Global Warming Swindle is the Great Global Warming Swindle.
Yeah.
It's funny, the Orwellian nature of climate change denial. That there's a website called Junk Science.
Oh yeah.
Run by.
There's a really funny story about that one. Junk Science included once one of my videos on their website. It has to do with the commercial where children blew up, which was was a bit of a black humor thing, which was
right.
It failed to do what it intended to do, and was like not a good thing to do.
Right.
And I had a clip of that starting with my video, and he included it on the website, but I was explaining the situation and rebutting a few points that people like him were making on it. So like, did you even check what you did include now?
Right. Yep. Well, and again, people will often try to engage these individuals in good faith, right? Because that's the way those are the rules of engagement for scientists and for people who are interested in an honest, conversation about science and its implications. We assume good faith. We assume
I still engage them in good faith.
And
but it doesn't stop me from slapping them down if they do say something that's really demonstrably incorrect.
No, that's right. And we can engage them in good faith, and they may not return the favor by responding in good faith. But that's the asymmetric nature.
You've experienced that more than your fair share, so to speak.
But in the case of this junkscience.com, so it's run by this guy Stephen Malloy, who turns out he was hired by the tobacco industry decades ago to try to discredit the science linking tobacco products to human health. He was involved in acid rain, you name it. He's one of the people who's behind the effort to sully the name of Rachel Carson, repeating false claims about DDT and mortality due to malaria. And, his job is basically being an all-purpose denier, a denier for hire, as I call it. He has been funded by corporate interests for decades to discredit any science that links, their industry to possible impacts on us or our environment. And so Steve Malloy runs this site called junkscience.com. And the joke, of course, is that the junk science isn't the stuff he's talking about. It's the stuff that he's producing. It's what he's saying. And the same thing with the the global warming swindle, which was supposed to expose, climate change as a swindle, but in fact it was the documentary that was the swindle. They actually, there's some very specific examples of how it was a swindle.
Yeah, Peter Sinclair gave a perfect video highlighting some of those. For example, how they cut off certain graphs because it didn't fit their argument and such.
Exactly. Or they even quoted out of context a very well-known oceanographer from MIT, Carl Wunsch, who was extremely upset that they took him out of context in such a way as to imply that he was saying the opposite of what he was actually saying.
That, for example, our CO2 emissions don't matter because the ocean will emit CO2. But it meant that what his argument was that because we're emitting CO2, it will warm the oceans, and the oceans will, in response to that, release CO2 and exacerbate the situation.
That's right.
Which is completely opposite than what they were claiming, that it meant our emissions don't matter.
Yeah, no, that's right. And like I said before, we as scientists or as advocates for science have to engage in good faith with the public and even with those who attack us, because that's part of the rules of, that's how science works. Science is steeped in good faith. You can disagree with people, but that
disagreeing is fine.
Yeah, but that should be based on scientific reasons and logical arguments.
Yeah,
and
I forgot who said it, but you're entitled to your opinions, but not your facts.
Yeah, it was a famous senator from New York, Patrick Moynihan, who once famously said that you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. Yeah. And what's so sad is in the decades since he said that, and he's no longer with us, and he retired some years ago, and he's no longer around. But I think he would be horrified at what is taking place today, because we now have arrived at a place in our public discourse where people do feel entitled to their own opinions when it comes to factual matters like the science of evolution and the science of climate change. And there is a whole cable news network in the US that is dedicated to an alternative universe, an alternative reality where the laws of physics no longer apply as we thought they did.
Or reporting on elections. That was really interesting to see as an outsider how the coverage of the U.S. elections went on Fox News.
Well, that's right. I mean, that was a situation where, for weeks, if not months, they had been denying what the public polling was saying, that, that the candidates that they favored, mostly Republican candidates, were, the Republican candidate for presidency, for example, was not favored by the public polling. And they had denied for weeks that the polling must be bad because they know that their candidate is ahead. And fortunately, in that case, there was a test, right, of whether or not they were right. I mean, it all came to a head.
The results.
In one night. We could learn whether or not their skepticism or their denial was justified. And we learned no, their denial wasn't justified. It was irrational. They weren't listening to what very careful pollsters were saying. They were instead inventing their an alternative reality. And the problem with matters like climate change is that they don't unfold overnight like an election. They unfold over years and decades. And so while they are very much guilty of denying the facts there, by the time, they are aware of their denial, it will be too late to make the sorts of, to engage in the sorts of actions necessary to avoid dangerous climate change. And so it's more of a challenge in this case, but at least we have some clear windows into how denial works that we can, take advantage of as we think about how to expose, the intellectual bankruptcy of denial when it comes to matters like climate change.
And how to construct effective messages.
Absolutely.
And Chris, you joined us for a couple of questions.
Yes. Do you think, Dr. Mann, that movies such as, let's say, 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow, they try to portray global climate catastrophes, but do those movies actually do you think that they give the public something to think about, even though they get the science completely wrong, or do you think they're actually forcing things like climate change into people's minds to the point that they're oversaturated and don't want to hear about it anymore?
It's a good question, and it's not my expertise. I'm not a communications expert, let alone a movie critic. But I can tell you that as a scientist who cares very much about the accuracy with which we inform the public about matters like climate change, that I do sometimes wince when I see the basic science misrepresented, by Hollywood in a movie like The Day After Tomorrow. On the one hand, it's great that the topic of climate change is being discussed, because too often there isn't enough discussion of this issue in, the public sphere. But at the same time, when the science is, potentially being caricatured by the way it's being treated, and there were a number of examples. In an introductory course I teach on climate change here at Penn State, we view The Day After Tomorrow. We go through the movie and we talk about all the things that it got wrong, because it's a useful learning tool. But there is the danger that if our science is caricaturized in the mind of the public, in the eyes of the public, that it makes it more difficult to have a serious discussion about what the science does say, and to explain that, no, we don't have to worry about the planet freezing over the course of several weeks. In fact, we expect the opposite to unfold, and on a much longer time scale. you have to sort of undo some of the damage that has been done by misportrayals of the science. And so it's a there's a delicate balance. It's a double-edged sword in a sense, because we do need to find ways to communicate the science to the public in easily digestible bites. And movies can be a very effective way of doing that. I, for example, thought that the movie Avatar does a great job at talking, almost, under the surface. It's not explicit, but it's really an allegory about our environment and the threats against our environment and the importance of, maintaining the health of our planet. And it's, of course, in that lesson is below the surface. It's part of the background of a narrative that's technically about something else, but there is an important message that's coming through. And so I thought that actually Avatar was much more effective as a means of informing the public about some of the basic challenges when it comes to our environment than a movie like The Day After Tomorrow, which probably reinforced misconceptions more than it actually informed the audience about the science.
Or like 2012 that just says global flood will happen, get to your
I
arcs.
am going to hurt you badly. I was
She
just
hates
about to
that
say
movie.
that film must be about the same, or The Day After Tomorrow must be about the same for you as 2012 is for me.
Yeah, I have to confess I haven't seen 2012, even though it's already 2013.
I don't know what your geology is like. I'm a geologist. It just makes me want to hurt people and small kittens and puppies.
Yeah, before you get to the next one, I want to follow up
babies
shortly.
and anything, really.
Well, I remember in the movie The Core came out. My Solid Earth geophysicist friends were absolutely horrified at the way the science of solid Earth geophysics was misrepresented, and it's a recurring theme.
I actually can stomach watching The Core much easier, having seen 2012 the one time.
Well, you probably find
it doesn't seem to be as bad now. I've seen something that's worse.
If every movie was scientifically accurate, they'd probably be boring.
Well,
That's
you've
exactly.
got to allow a little bit of leeway and play on the science, but there's a certain extent where it's just like, no, what are you doing?
May
right.
I add something? For example, one of the movies that was really attacked, for example, by Fox News, was one of the Dr. Seuss movies. What was it again with the trees? Lorax, thank you. I forgot the title.
Yeah.
It's really good at showing what the consequences are going to be if you do not pay attention to sustainability. And also what I really notice about that movie is that it shows that people can have good intentions, but it can have bad results, because the Ansler, he isn't a bad guy. He just got swept up in the events and thought he was doing a good thing. Right.
Well, I mean, it's very
that message
interesting.
Is very powerful.
Because the author Dr. Seuss, his real name was Theodore Dreiser, I think, had worked for industry. He had worked producing industry propaganda earlier in his career, and I don't know if he had a crisis of conscience, but he began writing children's books, and probably in the form of the Lorax. That one book probably did more to bring awareness to an entire generation that I was part of issues of environmental sustainability. That one book probably did more in terms of its informing the public consciousness than all of the movies that Hollywood has made about climate change or the environment combined. And so I think it does drive home the fact that a single individual and a single story, a single compelling narrative that is thoughtful in the way that it tries to present a story and keep the interest of the audience, but infuse the story with information and with science. And I think that it's possible to do both. I think it's possible to tell a compelling story and inform your readers or your viewers or your audience about fundamental issues of science and the environment at the same time. And I think that James Cameron was successful to some degree in doing that in Avatar, and I personally look forward to seeing what he does next. Actually, James Cameron right now is working on a project it's now underway to produce a series of it's a documentary series that I think is going to run on Showtime that is about climate change. Okay. And I can't wait to see him bring his talents to tackling this issue front and center.
I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, it's in production.
Yeah, Dr. Mann, do you ever feel like you want to be like Neil deGrasse Tyson and contact directors and TV show producers and just say, you're getting the science wrong. I'll help you get the science right. Just, talk to me and I'll help you out.
Well, there's a great story about that. You may be familiar with this story. It's told in Randy Olson's book, Don't Be Such a Scientist.
Yes, I have that. It's a great book.
It's a great book, and Randy is a great, he's somebody who does make movies, documentaries, or sometimes mockumentaries that are entertaining and yet informative at the same time. So in his book, he talks about an actual occurrence, an actual event that happened where, as I understand it, James Cameron ran into Neil deGrasse Tyson on the streets of Manhattan one day. Neil deGrasse Tyson, of course, runs the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History. I guess James Cameron was in New York. They ran into each other, and Neil actually told him that he had gotten something about the astronomy, the backdrop.
Yeah, the sky
above the Titanic.
Yeah, was wrong. It was not faithful to the actual distribution of the constellations and stars, and I forget the details of it. But he had gotten something wrong. James
Cameron, if I remember correctly, he had the southern hemisphere instead of the northern hemisphere.
Exactly. I think that's right. I think that's what it was. And initially, James Cameron had sort of had as I recall, he had brushed him off. It's like, oh, who are you? But then some weeks later, Neil deGrasse Tyson got a call from James Cameron and said, hey, what you said to me a few weeks ago, I'd like to get this right. I don't know if they somehow changed it in
they changed it in post-production.
Post-production, and so it's a success story, right, about science and entertainment worlds colliding.
Yeah, and I know you probably just want to throttle people and get this wrong, but I'd like to hear from a scientist's perspective a concise way of differentiating. Can you explain to people the difference between weather and climate?
Well, there's an aphorism that I think is often attributed to Mark Twain. I'm not sure if he actually said it or not. Half of what's attributed to Mark Twain he never did actually say, so you usually have to check these things. But I think it's the statement, climate is what you expect and weather is what you get, is one way of describing it. But, really, the distinction is between, in technical terms, if you want to be mathematical about it, climate is a boundary value problem and weather is an initial value problem. But that doesn't mean anything to most people. So what do I really mean when I say that? That climate is about the statistics of the weather. It's not about predicting individual weather events. And so I can't predict, a year from now. I can't predict 3 months from now what the weather is going to be like in State College, Pennsylvania, specifically, but I can predict with a fairly good degree of skillfulness that the temperatures during a 2-week period 3 months from now are going to be warmer than the temperatures averaged over a 2-week period right now. And that's because of something we call the seasons. Summer is warmer than winter. We know that reliably, and that demonstrates the predictability of climate. There are certain attributes of the weather that we can predict with a great degree of accuracy. It doesn't mean we can predict the specific state of the weather, whether it will rain in State College 3 months from now, but conditions will be generally warmer in State College 3 months from now than they are now because of the seasons. And for the same reason, we can reliably say that the globe will be warmer than it is today. On average, if we continue to increase the concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. One of the often used devices of climate change deniers is to intentionally confuse the public about that distinction, to make statements like, well, if meteorologists can't predict the weather today beyond 10 days, how is it that these climate scientists can tell you, about the way things might be a century from now? That is a very disingenuous line of argumentation, and one could see that argument being made by somebody who isn't very familiar with the science. But unfortunately, there are scientists in my field who are members of the National Academy of Sciences who have actually tried to make that argument before in attacking the science of climate change in public. They've made that very misleading argument that somehow our inability to predict weather 10 days from now has any implications for our ability to predict the warming of the globe from increasing greenhouse gas concentrations. It doesn't.
And if I understood correctly, Chris, that were the questions we had?
Is that it?
Was only. I think the other question wasn't specific to Dr. Mann, but somebody asked, which is worse, climate deniers or end-time prophets who want to end the world or want the world to end?
I'll defer to this group of skeptics on that latter question. But let me leave the audience with a little bit of information. If you want to continue to follow me, I participate vigorously on Twitter. I'm Micheal E. Mann at Twitter, so please follow me. I talk about these issues all the time on Twitter, and I have a Facebook page too. And please check out my book, The Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars, because it's my effort to talk about all of this in a broad.
Would you rather people buy the ebook version or the paper version? Save some trees there.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we can move towards a world where we don't have to, destroy trees to tell stories and to talk about things. But whatever people feel more, comfortable with is fine with me.
If I see it correctly, you have it on your left shoulder. I can see the picture of the new book.
Yes. Yep. It's right up there on the bookshelf. A shameless plug. Yep.
None of my books are up there, I guarantee you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Mann, and also for staying a bit longer than we originally agreed to.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was really it was an invigorating discussion, and I'd be happy to come back another time.
It was a pleasure having you, and we'll arrange something for maybe later in this year.
That sounds great. Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
And,
Bye.
Thank you to everyone who joined us today. That would be Colin Masson in the flesh for the third time, he claimed.
Yeah. I was online during the fundraisers.
So now whenever we say tech guy says something, the voice that you're hearing or that we're hearing that you guys can't. And we also were joined by Blue Juggernaut.
I was going to try and ask him a question before he left. I didn't get in time.
No, sorry.
That's all right.
You can ask on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter's always good. And we were joined late by Yoshimo.
Oops.
Yeah, I saw you mute and I wanted to catch you with that. And we were joined really, really late by Wombo, who came in after the first time I mentioned the movie 2012, which says something.
You spoke of evil and I had to come to smite it.
There was no evil here. We were just discussing whether movies...
that film.
Yeah, I was discussing whether or not movies can start to get people to ask and think about climate change, or does it just force it so much that they get tired of hearing it? And those were two examples I brought up.
I think it depends on how it's done. There's I don't know how well known it is, but the BBC did a
no, you cannot interrupt, Paul. You're not the
May I
guy.
interrupt for a moment? Dr. Mann, if you want to leave, I can recommend you just to hang up on us, and we can continue.
I didn't want to be rude, so all right.
No. I thought you had left. I'm sorry, Dr. Mann. Thank you.
No problem. I look forward to talking with you all again. So,
yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you for catching that call.
So now we can
nicest guest we've
continue
ever
with-
had. Most
Yeah,
people
yeah, I
can't
was
wait to
saying,
get out of the chat.
It's now about the right time for things to go downhill anyway, isn't it, timing-wise for us? But no, as I was saying, the BBC did a really excellent two-part mini-series drama thing. It was a bit like a mockumentary, but not kind of in the Mick take one, and it was called Super Volcano, and it was based on what might or what could happen if Yellowstone erupted again. And that was based very strongly on the established science. And that was very good, very entertaining and very accurate. So I think it does depend on whether or not they're trying to go for a super volcano style thing or 2012 stroke the day after tomorrow, which is, they're just saying, let's abuse and rape some science so that we can get a blockbuster and show some special effects.
If that were true, I was going to say, if that were truly an American movie, especially on the Sci-Fi Network, it would be Super Volcano versus Super Tornado.
Oh, God. Man, I remember watching Super Volcano in junior high school. That's an old one.
Are you referencing the book The Perfect Storm now? Because there is actually a science fiction book out there. I can fetch it from my.
Was that the one turned into a film with George Clooney in?
No. I did a direct translation from Dutch. It's an original English book, and in it you actually have a hurricane breaking the sound barrier with their wind speed. And completely stripping the Hawaiian Islands of their topsoil and all those kind of fun things.
How could it do that and have the rest of the atmosphere stay stable?
I have no idea, but it was really fun.
That's going to be some epically fecked up climate weather scenario.
The trigger for all that was that they launched a nuclear bomb as a warning shot for some country. I forgot the details because it was a couple of years ago and I read it. That melted methane clatrates in the Arctic region. So there was an influx of methane, accelerated global warming. The heat in it triggered those hurricanes, and they broke the sound barrier. It was complete and utter nonsense. But
I'm glad you've brought this up when Dr. Mann has gone, and we don't have to abuse him mentally with this.
I think he would have mentally shut down for the insanity of that
It'd be like
scenario.
if I said Nephilim free and that picture got put up.
Yes, we can't do that picture today. We're doing videos now. No, Colin.
No.
Don't do it.
Picture.
Bumble, stop.
Do it.
Okay,
do
that's it. Colin,
You what?
bring up Ian Juby's latest movie.
I don't have that on my desktop.
He's got a movie.
Yeah, or the latest video he uploaded, where he's trying to argue that uniformitarianism is wrong because one formation has younger rock on top of, or has younger rock underneath older rock.
Win.
And then, oh god, that picture.
That's disgusting. Who drew that?
And,
shot.
He was trying to argue that this one situation disproves uniformitarianism, and Claire actually just tore it apart.
Old rock on top of younger rock can't be explained.
Are you saying that this disproves uniformitarianism and proves a flood happened?
Oh, so let me get straight. The sequence was younger rock at the bottom and older rock at the top. Yeah. Inverted, sequencing. It's very well known in heavily tectonic areas. You've got set areas like that in Scotland.
Well, the funny thing was, Claire tore it apart
in the aging of the strata, and it's because of the compressive forces when the Iapetus Ocean closed.
Well, I was just going to explain, and I'm sorry to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the video yet, but Claire says, why didn't you look at the mountain to the west? And the mountain to the west actually has like a 45-degree angle of the rock just shifting over the other rock. It's pretty clear cut how the older rock got above the younger rock.
And even better, she actually cited research from that same region where that clay-like material that forms between layers that shift over each other. One more probably knows the term for it.
Are you talking about mylonites?
Yeah, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And Ian Juby claimed that it wasn't found in that region. Well, she cited a paper where it was said from this region we found malonite.
He found what?
Malonite?
Milanite.
Milanite, sorry.
Milanite.
Excuse him, he's a climatologist.
And he's Dutch. Put it
Ja,
in
ik kan echt gewoon in
web
Engels
chat.
praten hoor.
They have 50 words for
Go
tulip.
hug your clogs.
I don't have clogs. My dad has them, but I
You
don't.
should have clogs and tulips and cute little wimbles all over the place.
We're getting into national stereotypes now.
Yeah, but it's Colin. He deserves it.
I suppose.
See, we can't do this regularly because this is like the first time since, the first season that you've been live on the air with us.
What, me?
No, Colin.
I'm gonna say.
Yeah, Colin is usually behind the scenes, so this is the first time we actually get to play with him.
So let's get all of our
Play with them
mean-spirited
being
jabbing out of the way.
And of course,
yeah.
he's currently trying to
You're right.
reconnect.
You should hear what he says to us when we're not doing this.
The most hilarious
Worst
thing
part.
is, Colin just recently upgraded his computer. He bought all new components to make sure that he could handle video recording and be able to handle Dr. Mann's interview properly. And he's having so much trouble with Skype today.
It's my laptop. It's the only piece of equipment that I have that's still 5 years old.
Well,
It's luckily
on the good
not my
side,
broadcast equipment.
on the good side, you have
What-
something in
what's
common with
up?
Catholic priests.
They're not crashing.
You love your equipment that's 5 years old.
God.
Well, it is sustainable.
Oh.
Well, the economic lifespan of a computer equipment is 3 years. So I'm
My
uh,
laptop's 3.
yeah, and the technical lifespan is normally calculated as 5 years. So
I tried to get mine fixed recently, which is part of the reason why I haven't been on so much, because it just exploded.
So, who else do you want to get this season on the air if we can?
Claire?
now Claire doesn't.
Claire, yeah, she doesn't really like this after her incident with the Magic Sandwich Show.
Incident?
Yeah.
I spoke to Claire previously about it, and it's not quite her cup of tea, which is fair enough.
She
Yeah,
prefers
it left a bad taste in her mouth. She didn't appreciate it or enjoy the environment.
Then again, it is the Magic Sandwich Show.
Will you say anything bad about them?
No, I'm just saying that we're much, much better
amateur
in
part.
every way.
At least we have less technical issues.
There's the guy
Oh,
who
God.
keeps disconnecting from Skype.
I was adding something on our broadcast equipment.
But seriously, is there anybody else you guys would like to try to see? We can get them.
Well, what kind of subject do we want to talk about?
Skeptic
Or
TV.
what do we want?
Or
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what subjects do you guys want to talk us about? Want us to talk about? You can let us know on our blog, or emailing various people. I know you can email at womble@skeptictv.net, and I think there's Colin at skeptictv.net, as well as contact@skeptictv.net.
Yeah, you can leave a comment on our YouTube channel or send us a message there.
Yeah,
or send us
individual
on
YouTube
our
channels as
respective
well.
YouTube channels a message and we can tackle it.
And if you have questions about geology, you can send them to 2012@skeptictv.net.
Oh,
I haven't made that
If
one.
you have
That's
any
a good
questions
idea.
about how to cause people pain, you can send them to Chris Bear is going to die at skeptictv.net.
There was actually a funny story, a little bit off tangent, that one of the recent singers who tried out for the American reality TV show The Voice, he had a voice that sort of was similar to Tina Turner's, but in the blind audition, they couldn't tell whether it was a guy or a gal, so they passed on him. As soon as they found out it was a guy, they all wanted to bring him onto the show, but it was too late to pick him. So he was such a heartthrob, and so many women loved him that they started sending what they thought was his Twitter handle, nude photos of themselves. And it turns out it was a female reporter who was getting these, and she asked everyone in her article to please stop sending them to her.
But to steer the subject back to the climate, it would be a good idea. Because I know you like your creation as bashing, but the actual topic for this show is climate.
Yeah, well, I was just going to finish up.
Well, I think
don't send
there's
anything
overlap.
bad to me. Send things bad to my actual account, and that's womble@skeptictv.net.
You wish. You wish. The one thing I was going to say is creationists do actually overlap to some extent with climate change.
That's
climate
something
science
I
deniers.
also noticed that
Because it kind of, for them, it's there's no such thing as climate change because the world's young. It's always been like this, and end times are coming anyway. Let's burn all the fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's a bit of strange overlap you see, and the really strange part is that if you want something that goes completely off the deep end on climate matters, go to a creationist website, because the stuff you will find there is in no way related to anything we can see in the real world or what we find in scientific literature. It's bizarre, to say the least.
Yeah, we're talking about shiny nuggets of poo. Remember, you can't polish a poo, but you can roll it.
You can. Mythbusters prove that.
You can. Mythbusters, yeah. By the way, guys, I have a special guest if we want to bring her on.
You have?
Yeah, I got Dr. Smith.
Ah.
Yes. Yes. Excellent for debunking anything creationists say.
You remember her from one of my April 1st videos? I think last year's April 1st video. So she decided to join me because I was talking and ignoring her.
Oh, yeah, we've got a good one from.
Stroke your pussy live on air, then, Bear.
Well, somebody had to.
We've got a good question from Trolling with Logic. Do you think there are politicians who go along with climate change now for the sake of getting elected?
Quite possibly.
I suspect this is true, considering how big the group is in the political arena.
Razan God has put an interesting question something I've not heard about. He said, wasn't there a Republican who cited Noah's Ark to debunk human-caused climate change this week?
Yeah, someone did. I can't remember.
Who is this captain of intelligence?
I can't remember who it was because I saw it scroll by in my news feeds, but someone actually did that.
Usual suspect or a new guy?
Not one of the usual suspects, as he's known as a climate science denier, but he's not one of the more known ones, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. If it were Rick Perry, it would be huge news.
Yeah, it was a bit of a side. It was a bit of a side note in this complete line of reasoning he did. It was a bit of a weird tangent in it.
And about that last question about the politicians getting money, politicians denying climate change for getting reelected. One of the things that happens a lot is companies like Coke Industries will give politicians who agree with them a large amount of campaign donations. And so in America, mostly, if whoever has the more campaign money is usually the one who wins. And so most politicians will side with them, because they'll get a lot of money for their campaign to guarantee that they're reelected.
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly impossible for people to cite good science because there's such a brand out there to deny it for religious or just anti-elitist idealism that anyone who says evolution is valid or says that global climate change is truly happening are cast aside. No matter what else they can do for the people, they're probably not going to win in certain states or regions. It's just impossible, so they have to stay silent on it, which perpetuates the ignorance. Wow, it totally ended the show right there.
Oh, no, sorry, I was...
American ignorance, yes! America!
Yeah, America. You are all like that.
The problem isn't much better over here.
It depends where you are over here.
It was Barton.
God posted us a link.
Yeah, and it is Barton, the congressman, Republican Congressman Barton.
Yeah, I don't know him, so either he's trying to make a name for himself or he's statewide rather than national.
Probably state.
Yeah. I mean, just consider how many people run on a platform of more money for education. They almost probably about 80% of them in regions where people don't like higher education or don't want funding for higher education. Those people, about 80% of the time, are probably going to lose on that one issue.
What they want is something that masquerades as education that just helps reinforce their dogma.
Yeah, and some of the places I follow, and even on Reddit recently, there's people posting Facebook comments or messages, emails from people who say, I can't believe you went to college and now you're no longer a Christian, or you no longer believe this or that. This is what an education does to you. And it's like, yeah. I don't understand the downside of that.
Yeah, obviously going and getting your education level increased is clearly a bad thing.
Exactly.
Well, we have another question from Trolling with Logic. What's the worst piece of climate change denial evidence you guys have heard? I've got a good one, but what do you have to say?
I have to love what Conservapedia does. Conservapedia will point to any place. Like recently, they had an article that showcased that the Minnesota Twins may have to cancel their first game in like 20 years due to snow, thus disproving global warming. And it's like, until recently, the Minnesota Twins played under a dome. They didn't play in an outdoor stadium. So there was no need for them to cancel due to a snowstorm.
Wow.
I put my favorite in the chat back down there. It was, I think, 2 years ago. Fox and Friends was talking about the weather, and they're like, oh, well, it's snowing in New York City in freaking January, so obviously climate change is false, because otherwise it'd be too warm for snow.
Isn't that normal for New York?
Yes. It'd be weird if it wasn't snowing.
No, the thing that'll happen if the climate shifts is the UK, and by the way, the entirety of the United Kingdom, British Isles, whatever it is that we call the landmass that is where England is, we're above New York. Newcastle upon Tyne, which is one of the northernmost cities in England, because this is before we get to Scotland. There is a difference, Americans. I know you find it confusing, but there is a difference, trust me.
England is just London and not England.
I thought the country was called England.
Yeah.
There's England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Anyway, Newcastle upon Tyne, the northernmost city in the in England, is on the same latitude as Moscow. I had to think for a moment if it was latitude or longitude. It's latitude.
Yeah. Latitude is north to south, and longitude is east to west. But correspond with that too. People in Austin can't believe how warm it is in the summer. It's like Austin is the same latitude as Cairo, Egypt. So what do you expect? But what was your greatest piece of garbage for client science denialism?
That's what's been popping up lately a lot and has been mentioned a lot on my Moncton video, which is that there has been no global warming for the past 16 years, or pick a number. That's not true. We don't. Well, the detail is we don't see a increase in the global temperature for land and air temperature data sets, but there's a reason for that. We haven't had any really big El Niños, which dump a lot of heat in the atmosphere, and it doesn't disprove what models do, because we actually see these kind of periods in the models. Something I constantly have to say in my comment sections. Another detail is, if you look at the oceans and then at deep oceans, we actually see that the heat content is increasing. In other words, there's still a temperature imbalance on our planet. Currently we're not seeing it in the atmosphere. And dealing with that is a lot of work currently on my comments section.
Yeah, water has a high specific heat capacity, so it will take a lot of energy to warm it up. And just the one thing it's just suddenly brought to mind is if we kind of look at what happens to the temperature of water during its state changes. Mm-hmm. If you take a frozen bit of ice and you start heating it up, the temperature will increase, and then it will stop and it will plateau out. And what's happening at that point is the heat isn't making the water hotter. The heat at that point is going into making it liquid. You've hit the melting. And you can. This is something you could graph with probably very basic equipment at home even. And then as you keep heating up that water, the temperature, once it's liquid, will rise again. Mm-hmm. And then it'll get to a certain point, and the temperature increase will plateau out. That's because, again, the energy this time is going into the molecules, not to move them from a solid to a liquid state, but to move them from a liquid to a gaseous state. And it's the point at which you have vaporization or boiling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somebody's asking, what is our opinion on the likelihood of an asteroid and meteor hitting the Earth? It's happened in the past many times. It's going to keep happening.
The chance is
especially, yeah, it's especially going to happen
whether
real
it's going to be big
soon.
enough to feck things over.
Yeah, it's going to happen real soon because Womble has taken NASA's initiative and she's going to go out and get her own asteroid.
Yeah, they're just
Yes,
not
it's all
providing me with them
planned
quick
out.
enough. I want a Russian impact over the UK just for the lulz, and because
Just
I
look
want.
at
them.
I thought you wanted your own pet asteroid. You were talking about how you were going to.
I do, yeah. But I want to get a male asteroid and a female asteroid and breed them.
She wants to wear an asteroid belt. You know how it is.
Look what happened in Tunguska. There's like so many mile diameter of trees just flattened.
Yeah.
That was because that was
Airburst.
Yeah, airburst. Yeah, I'm having a bad day for words today. So
Wait,
what
the
happened
Dutch
was
guy is beating you with the words?
it happens sometimes. Dyslexic.
Yeah. Plus, she has fond
that's
memories
always
of
the
2012.
Yeah, and
But
you
yeah,
have an issue with Nephilim free, don't you, Bear?
It
Yeah,
always
the-
devolves into this. We can't stop it.
It's just nice to know that we've done the good bit with the posh guest on, and they've gone, and we can now just derange and spiral out of control like normal. It's a good thing we haven't got onto the smutty.
We can go to our normal SkepticTV stick with
God, that-
antagonizing each other.
Really?
But Lewis isn't here with his YouTube poop references.
Yeah, unfortunately, Lewis has quit due to real life commitments. So
Yeah, we will speak to him later, and I'm sure it won't be him gone forever from us. We'll get his YouTube poop references back.
well,
I will have to make them instead.
Organic Beekeeper just asked which is worse, an airburst or ground impact. Same size meteorite. Ground impact. No questions asked.
Definitely.
In an airburst, it's breaking up as it comes to the ground, and each time it breaks up, the body is losing energy. It's losing some of that velocity energy, and it's being dissipated. It does mean that you're going to have a massive area hit by shock waves, as happened in Russia when those shock waves came around and shattered all of those windows. But if all of that energy got driven into the ground, you create a massive fireball scenario. Lots of destruction, lots of seismic waves would be produced from the impact. So you'd have, you're effectively creating the equivalent of an extremely powerful, earthquake. Probably something I am speculating here. Probably something more along the lines of what happened to Tokyo the other year. If it happened over water, there's a lot of water being vaporized there, a lot of effect on the local area at the very least, and you would still probably have some form of fireball event and a massive scorched earth scenario.
Still
And if it hits the ground, you're going to have a lot of dust going in the air, which is going to cause a lot of climate problems as well.
Exactly,
you get global dimming, which means
I was going to say, actually, if we had a few significant sized impacts on the ground now and they kicked up enough dust, it might effectively cancel out some of the warming we're doing because of, as Colin said, the global dimming effect. What happens is you get all those fine particles in the atmosphere, and they decrease the amount of sunlight energy getting down to the earth. I think it's to do with cloud coverage or something. I'm not sure.
No, that particulate matter in the atmosphere, but that can also be used for cloud formation. It's a bit of a complex situation.
yeah, and I think it's the
You get this
there.
haze that you have around the planet that basically is like a bit of a sunscreen on the planet that prevents some of the light hitting the ground and warming it.
Yeah, I think the statistics are still that there's not a single recorded event of anyone dying from a meteor strike.
Apparently, there was
Wasn't there a dog?
70s, a dog, yeah.
Yeah, but no human.
And something's hit someone's car, but nothing. No one's been killed. There's a few recorded instances where a meteorite has landed literally through someone's house, and they were really shocked by the fact that when they, just after this thing happened, it was still cool enough to touch. That's partly down to the deep freeze it's in space, and as it's impacting through the atmosphere, A, it's the outer layers that get the superheating first, and B, by the time you get to low levels, within the last few meters of the ground, if it's a smallish size rock, it's not falling that fast anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. To ask Colin something that was brought up in the trailer for today's show, is the asteroid that nearly hit us due to global warming?
No.
I had to include that in today's trailer.
Yeah,
it was just too priceless.
That was the only
asked a slightly
situation.
question earlier. If climate change
Oi,
continue, would we
shut
end up
it.
having to call snowy, rainy?
Wombo, you just interrupted Colin.
Sorry, I couldn't hear him. It was obviously not that important if he wasn't speaking loud enough for me to hear.
You think everyone who's not a geologist or a
Typical
rock is
woman.
unimportant.
But it's nothing to do with being a woman, Blue. It's because I'm a geologist and you're an inferior scientist because you're a biologist.
I'm a
Colin, what were you going to say?
I lost completely track of what I was going to say. What was the point again? The question. Oh wait, the meteorite. Yeah, I completely forgot what I was going to say. Thank you, Wombo.
Organic. Was that? I know Organic Beekeeper asked what is the critical size for a meteor, and my response, slightly tongue in cheek. How long is a piece of string? You don't really kind of have a critical size for them. It depends what you mean. For killing people or obliterating planets?
Well, what do you want to do?
Well, for obliterating a planet, the planet is good.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
what do you
or
wanna do with
a planetesimal-sized thing.
Yeah.
We could always smash Mars together with the Earth and get another moon.
Yeah.
Or just steal the
What? No,
Mars
well,
has.
that was a glancing blow from something Mars-sized.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a little off topic too, but you guys have seen the recent artist portrayal of Saturn if it were as far from Earth as the moon is.
Yeah, that was nice. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. With the meteorite. That was the first time that I actually cited a Fox News article where they debunked the point they made on CNN, did that question, that it could have been caused by global warming. And I said that I agreed with them. That was the first time I actually said that for an article for them. That I fully agreed what they were saying. Of course, I didn't agree with
Fox News.
Yeah, but of course they were doing it again for what they have is to cast doubt on the science of climate, on the climate science. But yeah, but the
when
conclusion
Fox
was
News
correct.
thinks what you said was too incredulous, then you really should rethink what you said.
Yeah.
Did Fox News have to go lie down for a very long time after it said something correct?
No, it just went into a tirade about how Obama is really Satan.
What?
So it just returned to normal
You
programming.
guys didn't hear about that when the Bible was airing on, what was it, the History Channel, I believe?
Yeah.
The guy who was portraying the character Satan looked a little bit too much like Obama.
I caught a bit about
Why
it,
am
but I
I not
ignored it.
surprised?
It was a bit too insane.
Yeah. Well, it's insane that something that's about the Bible is on the History Channel, but...
Of course he's the devil. He caused the meteor in Russia.
But speaking of Obama, so we can tie it back to the topic, Colin and Womble and Blue, since you guys are outside the United States, do you think Obama is doing enough to get the United States in the appropriate direction for climate change?
I don't know, really. I haven't really.
Looks like we lost Colin.
I haven't really paid that much attention to it, but from what I know, he's basically another bought politician. So whichever way the money wants to go.
But he can't run again for office, so it shouldn't matter in his second term.
Yeah, but there's probably some backroom stuff that nobody knows about. We don't know these politicians.
Well, I definitely think he is the son of Satan, and he wasn't born in the United States.
That's not the question. You weren't even paying attention. You weren't even paying attention. Go back to your rocks.
No, I was vaguely listening. I was also kind of idly.
You were playing with rocks. Just admit it.
What?
You were playing with rocks. Just admit it.
Oh, but they're so fun.
How about you, Colin? Do you think Obama is moving the United States in the proper direction with climate change?
Yes and no.
You have to explain more than that.
Well,
He's
the
Dutch, he
detail
doesn't need
is
to.
he's making the right noises, and generally speaking. Well, in the sense that he's saying that we do need to take action and that that we do need leadership on those matters. The problem is he's not fully acting on it yet.
Yeah. The final question we can take today from Organic Beekeeper. Would a small meteor hitting Yellowstone cause an eruption like in the movie 2012?
Nephilim free.
No.
No, probably not. Yeah, small meteor. Well, it would be it's a meteor unless it's something. It would be a meteorite. But a small rock, no, not really. It'd be about the same as a really fat American falling over. But it is, from what I understand, there's a possibility that Yellowstone volcanic complex is almost pretty much not nursed again. From what I understand, there's the possibility that the Yellowstone volcanic complex will be entering a phase of shutting down because with the tectonic plates, and the fact that the plate's moving, and you can see the remnants of older structures that are trailing off towards the west. So the plate is being pushed from east to west, and so it's being pushed away from the hot spot that it is.
Did you watch a bit too much Star Trek?
I was going to say, is it Nimoy or Quinto?
Words fuddled every now and then. It's terrible if I ever want to speak to Betty Swallows.
Oh, God. For those who didn't get it, just transpose the first sounds.
Where do you think the nearest hotspot place will pop up after it leaves Yellowstone?
It's gonna, if you...
We all know that Las Vegas is going to split open and the buildings are going to collapse over.
The Statue of Liberty will be destroyed.
No, Rosin God, a really fat American tripping over would not cause Yellowstone to erupt.
I suppose it
Well, it depends on who the American is.
If it's someone like Rush Limbaugh, then yeah.
Well, that's mostly his ego, not his weight.
It depends on the density of their brain. Yeah, most creationists, there wouldn't be much impact. It's a bit like what you feed a darting zombie, a creationist.
Colin, question on the topic. Who do you think right now in the media or in print is causing the most misinformation for global climate change?
I would name two. At the moment, Fox News for their reach and the amount of people they use for that. And in the blogosphere, what's up with that?
Okay. Wow, dead air again. Woohoo! America!
Fuck yeah!
You guys really...
Save the motherfucking day, yeah.
You guys really like citing that movie.
It's the American movie, of course we do.
We have no intelligence! Yes, you're so
That's actually what Americans look like. We're really wooden marionettes on the ends of strings.
That's how you can tell us from the
Every
Canadians,
place
because
we
we actually
stay-
have movable mouth parts, and the Canadians just have the head flap.
I love the good South Park reference.
Well, Blue, of course you do. So we're running down the show here. So any last thoughts or anything else?
Rocks!
Well, no one likes rocks except for geologists, so we can ignore that.
Rocks. And biology isn't a real science.
It is a real science.
I'd like to say it's good to be back, and hopefully I should be back permanently now.
Yay!
You're permanently back in Bangor, Maine.
And I have to
it's
say,
a bit
this
shit
was...
up here at the moment.
I have to say, this was one of a hell of a episode to start our season with after the kickoff.
Yeah. Just a reminder, folks, with special guests, our shows are 2 hours. Without a special guest, they're only 1 hour. That's why we ran long today. And I'd like to thank everyone who showed up today. We'll be back in 2 weeks on April 27th if you want to catch us again. Let's go back in order. The last person in was Womble.
Ow.
That's how you want to say goodbye to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Yoshimo joined us late.
Well, I was busy, but yeah.
And
Bye-bye.
Blue was mostly silent, but he was here among the first people.
How dare you call me silent?
He also had no video.
Well,
And,
slows my computer down to buggery. Hey,
And-
bye everyone. Have fun wherever you go.
and finally, we had the person who just really, really, really wanted to be on today's show. That's Colin Masson.
Of course.
Say goodbye
Only
to
because he
everyone,
thinks
Colin.
we like him.
Goodbye,
This time
everyone.
people can hear you. You're not just a voice in our heads.
How strange is that, eh?
Now we
And,
can no longer say the voices in our heads of telling us to do this.
And this has been C.S. Barry, your host today, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See y'all.
Bye.